There is a piece of mail that can cut your pay without anybody at your job signing off on it. You get one every year, and you file it away without reading past the first line. Imagine this. You get a 3% raise in January. By March, you are statistically poorer than you were before the raise. This isn't a math error. This is the new American reality. Your mortgage servicer wants $84 more a month. Your health plan moves the deductible. Your homeowner's policy renews at a number you have to read twice. None of it is a mistake. Every letter is correct, polite, and legally required. By the end of the first quarter, you've taken a massive pay cut, and nobody at your company touched your salary. When we think of the middle class getting wiped out, we picture the 2008 financial crisis. We picture foreclosures on the evening news and Lehman Brothers boxes. But that's not what this looks like. This looks like a woman with a raise, a steady job, and a house sitting at her kitchen table with a calculator, realizing the math simply doesn't work anymore. Today, we are taking apart the financial headlines to see what's actually happening to your money. Because the headlines, they're almost never the thing actually happening to you. To understand why it feels so hard to get ahead right now, we have to look at a broken definition. Pew Research defines the middle class as a household earning between 2/3 and double the national median. For a family of 3, that's a floor of about $54,000 and a ceiling of $163,000. A family scraping by on $55K and a family clearing $160K are officially the exact same class. But let's be real. That's not a socioeconomic category. That's just a shrug with a spreadsheet attached. Everyone quotes the stat that the middle class is shrinking from 61% in 1971 to barely 51% today. But the doom and gloom videos leave out a key detail. Most of the people who left the middle class actually went up. The upper income share nearly doubled. So if statistically Americans are getting richer, why doesn't it feel that way to you? Because the answer has almost nothing to do with your income. Here is the framework you need to understand the modern economy. The middle class was never actually an income bracket. It was a risk pooling arrangement. Think about what made your parents or grandparents middle class. Yes, they had a wage, but underneath that wage sat 4 massive pillars they rarely had to think about. First, housing. One income could carry the mortgage. Second, healthcare. An employer absorbed the cost. Third, retirement. A pension meant somebody else was contractually on the hook to pay them until they died. Fourth, education didn't require a 30-year balance sheet of debt. Those weren't just workplace perks. Those were the load-bearing walls of the American dream. Somebody else held the risk. So who holds the risk now? You do. All 4 of those risks have been handed to you. You still get the paycheck, sure, but now you also get the deductible. You get the escrow adjustment. You take on the stock market risk for your 401k. You absorb the student loan repayment restructure. And nobody calls a meeting to tell you this is happening. It happens in envelopes. Roughly 11 of them from 11 different companies over 14 months. Everyone is boringly correct, and every single one is a perfectly reasonable business decision. But combined, they are bleeding you dry. Let's look at the self-employed, the tradesmen, the gig workers, the freelancers. A guy in his late 50s installing HVAC under a house in 100 degrees heat. He checks his phone on his break, and he sees the premium to keep his family insured for 1 year. He is the guy everyone points to when they say, "Learn a trade. AI can't crawl under a house." True, his labor is future-proof, but he is still the most financially exposed person in this economy. Why? Because when you work for yourself, you find out what your benefits actually cost. Do you know what yours cost? The average family health premium in this country runs nearly $27,000 a year. You might pay $7,000 out of your paycheck, and your employer covers the rest. But that rest is not a gift. It is your compensation routed around your bank account, spent on your behalf at a price you had zero part in negotiating. That money has been outrunning your wage for 2 decades.
Let's talk about envelope number 3, the escrow analysis. You bought a house, you got a fixed-rate mortgage. The whole point of a fixed rate is that you lock it in, you sleep at night, and you let inflation eat the payment over 30 years. Your rate is fixed, but your housing cost is not. Homeowners insurance now makes up about 9% of the average monthly payment. That is the highest share ever recorded. And premiums rose in 95% of American zip codes over the last 3 years. Not just the coastal ones, not just the wildfire ones, 95% of all of them. At a certain point, it stops being a risk premium and starts being a subscription service. Your property taxes are up. Your deductible jumped 22% in 1 year. Same policy, same house, less coverage, more money. 1 month out of every 11, you are working purely to pay a company whose core competency is finding a reason your claim doesn't apply. You bought a fixed-rate loan and you got a variable rate life. And if you rent, out of 46 million American renters, only about 6 million can afford a median-priced home on first-time buyers' terms. So if you've been wondering if you're the problem, you're not. You're just competing against cash buyers who don't need a bank in the room. Notice something about all these envelopes? Not a single one shows up as a pay cut. So what's been absorbing the difference between your stagnant wages and your rising fixed costs? Debt. Total household debt sits around $18.8 trillion. But the aggregate number isn't the story. The composition is. Look at auto loans. The average new car payment has hit a record $770 a month. That is rent in a good chunk of this country. Meanwhile, the share of auto balances 90 days or more past due recently hit 5.6%. That is higher than the previous record set during the wreckage of 2008. More Americans are seriously behind on car loans right now after the housing collapse. And your car loan is the last thing you let slip, because the car is how you get to the job that pays for the car. When auto defaults spike, it isn't telling you people got careless. It's telling you the shock absorbers have bottomed out. The emergency fund is now a piece of plastic with a 24% interest rate on it. Now you might turn on the news and hear that everything is fine. You hear the unemployment rate went down.
But look closer. Often, the unemployment rate falls not because of explosive job growth, but because people simply stop looking. Labor force participation drops. If you give up on the brutal, ghosting-filled job market, statistically, you evaporate. You stop counting as unemployed. The rate falls for the wrong reasons. What about AI taking jobs? The honest picture is quieter than the sci-fi panic. Entry-level hiring at large tech firms has collapsed. When automatable tasks vanish, nobody gets hired for the leftovers. The work just gets handed upward to whoever's already inside the building, which feels like job security, right up until you realize you're doing the work of 2 people for the pay of 1. They didn't cut the corporate ladder. They just removed the bottom rung. Then there's the wealth illusion. You see headlines screaming, "Household wealth hits an all-time high," or "Average 401k balances reach $167,000. Every outlet runs that average number. But the median balance is roughly $44,000. The average describes a person that does not exist. It is a mathematical ghost conjured by a handful of enormous balances standing beside an enormous number of tiny ones. The bottom half of American households owns roughly 1% of all stocks. The top 10% owns close to 90%. When a headline says household wealth hit an all-time high, the household being described isn't yours. It's somebody else's, and you are just cordially invited to feel represented by it. You didn't get poorer on paper. You just got less insured, less secure, and more burdened. I want to be direct with you.
because I think a lot of people watching this have been carrying a heavy burden privately. If you are earning what your parents would have called serious money, and you still feel like you are losing ground every single month, you are not bad with money. Among households earning between $100,000 and $150,000 a year, the share living paycheck to paycheck, not by choice, but out of necessity, because fixed costs eat everything, doubled in a single year to 24%, 1 in 4, at 6 figures. You didn't fail the test. The test changed while you were taking it, and nobody came to collect the old one.
And there are 2 cliffs ahead we have to talk about. This fall, wage garnishment on defaulted federal student loans can restart. Up to 15% of your disposable pay can be taken with no judge signing anything. The second date is 2032. That is when Social Security's retirement trust fund is projected to run dry. It won't disappear completely, but revenue will only cover about 78% of scheduled benefits. That means an automatic, across-the-board 22% cut. That's roughly $500 a month out of a typical retirement check, automatically with nobody voting for it. This isn't a hypothetical. This is a scheduled event that Congress has watched approach with the urgency of a man watching a slow leak from across the room. So what do you actually do? 2 things. Neither is flashy, which is exactly why they work. First, price your total housing cost, not your mortgage payment. Pull your last 2 escrow analyses. Find the rate of change. Assume it will continue. Budget for the variable numbers so you don't get ambushed every February. Second, and this is the one that really matters, you have to get onto the ownership side of something, however small, because every divide we've talked about today runs along one single line. Does your money come only from your labor, or does it also come from things that pay you while you sleep? The middle class isn't being wiped out by a massive, loud crash. Crashes are loud, they end, and somebody writes a movie about them. This is quieter, and in many ways, it's worse. It is the slow conversion of a wage into a pile of obligations, and the shift of a shared risk into a private one. Nobody repealed your grandparents' pension. It just quietly stopped being included in the envelope. So go look at what came in your mail this month. Look past the balance, look at the terms, and then ask yourself, what do you actually own, other than the payments? Thanks for watching. Check the math yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.